Okay, good morning and welcome to the ParkBridge Wealth Management Spring Webinar Series. This program is entitled Impact Investing: How to Make a Difference with Your Wealth in 2025 and Beyond. As always, my name is Jonathan Shenkman, and I'm the President and Chief Investment Officer of ParkBridge Wealth Management. In that role, I serve in a fiduciary capacity to help my clients achieve their financial objectives. The goal of my programs is to bring professionals together to help them better serve their clients, and this is done by educating attendees on the latest topics in wealth planning and by encouraging collaboration between the client's attorney, CPA, and financial advisor where appropriate. My practice focuses on working with high net worth families, businesses, and not for profits. I manage individual investment portfolios, trust accounts, corporate retirement plans, and endowments to help my clients achieve their financial goals. In addition to the 20 or so events I run every year, I also do a fair amount of writing on the topics of investing and financial planning. And you can read my work in a variety of periodicals, including Barron's, CNBC, Forbes, Kiplinger, The Wall Street Journal, and Trust and Estates Magazine, to name just a few. You can see all my work on my website at parkbridgewealth.com/articles or by following me on social media at Jonathan on Money. Additionally, you can check out my weekly podcast, which is also called Jonathan on Money, and you can listen to that on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, with that introduction, let's now jump into the program. And before getting into the meat of the presentation, I want to share an agenda for this talk. This is not the typical webinar promoting the virtues of impact investing, so it's worth highlighting what we're going to cover today. First, it makes sense to share an overview of impact investing, ESG, and so forth, since there are so many similar terms for this type of strategy. Next, I'm going to discuss the demand shift we've experienced in ESG products over the past 4 years. This will lead us into the 4 reasons why investors have soured on ESG funds. I'm then going to suggest a better way to approach impact investing. Then we'll go through an actual case study evaluating a values-based investment product. And I'll offer some thoughts on the future of impact investing. And finally, I'm going to discuss the most important takeaway when it comes to impact investing that are important for investors and their clients to take to heart. Okay, let's first discuss a definition of impact investing. So, in a nutshell, impact investing, which is an overarching term for a specific style of investing, is an investment strategy that aims to generate financial returns while also creating positive social or environmental impact. Unlike traditional investing, which focuses solely on profit, impact investing considers how investments can contribute to sustainability, social justice, and economic development. Impact investments are made with a measurable or a tangible goal for social change in mind. From there, the criteria may differ depending on your own values and focus. For example, you may choose to invest in a company that commits to planting a certain amount of trees per year, or another company that provides resources to schools, school districts, and low income communities. I'm guessing that many attendees have heard other phrases used in conjunction with impact investing, such as socially responsible investing, or SRI, or environmental, social, and governance investing, known as ESG. These investment models follow more specific criteria and guidelines such as ethical business practices, environmental conservation, and local community impact. For example, let's just take a quick look at the letters of the ESG acronym. E is for environmental investing, investing in companies that demonstrate concern for the environment when they choose to reduce their total carbon footprint, use sustainable energy, work in LEED certified buildings, reduce waste, development clean energy, and or give back to the environmental causes. For social investing, social responsibility occurs when a company commits to paying living wages, accepting product liability, protecting data, and providing a healthy and a safe work environment. When it comes to governance, this encompasses transparent company ownership and control, diversity, although I'm not really sure how popular that is these days, board independence, financial transparency, and ethics. It's important to note that impact investments like SRI and ESG investments have certain risks based on the fact that the criteria excludes certain securities of certain issuers for non-financial reasons, and are therefore investors are going to have to forego some market opportunities, and the universe of investments available will be smaller. In terms of the size of the market, impact investments account for $1.16 trillion of investments worldwide, with 37% held in North America. It's also worth noting that there are different types of investments one can use to implement these strategies. As investors define their values, the type of investments they may want to use will become more clear. But today, there are approximately 830 funds that invest based on ESG related criteria alone. So it's imperative to first determine which values or issues are important to you in order to narrow down suitable products to implement your strategy. The key is to determine what the investor is passionate about. Is it sustainability, social justice, the religion, or another area? Deciding what an investor is looking to accomplish will help narrow down what to focus on to more accurately align your values with your investments. And one more item worth mentioning, I'm going to use the the phrase impact investing, ESG, and SRI investing all interchangeably throughout this program. Again, the key to remember is that all these approaches are about aligning investors' money with their values. So, from my vantage point as a financial advisor for nearly 20 years, I obviously have arrived at my own conclusions regarding impact investing and ESG in particular. First, I should point out that in my practice, I work almost exclusively with private clients, oftentimes multiple generations of one family. So, my experience may be vastly different than other folks who work with institutional investors, but I'll share what I have personally noticed. So, when onboarding a new client, I always ask if there are special considerations before investing. This can be anything from excluding certain stocks or sectors or various other parameters. It also implies whether the client wants an ESG focus, but could be anything that an investor feels passionate about. And about 5 to 7 years ago, I actually had a fair amount of interest from clients regarding ESG specific funds. And I remember clients saying to me, if I can implement my strategy and seamlessly use only ESG friendly products, then why not just use ESG funds for every asset class? And this occurred quite frequently, where clients would prefer implementing a strategy using exclusively ESG funds so that they can grow their money while also benefiting society. But things have changed. More recently in my practice, my existing clients and new clients have seemed far less enthusiastic about traditional ESG funds. In fact, an existing client reached out a couple weeks ago who had a new inflow of capital due to a liquidity event and unprompted told me that he did not want any of his money invested in ESG products. I didn't even mention ESG to him, yet he felt strongly enough about wanting to avoid these type of funds that he actually made the point of telling me to exclude them from his portfolio, which I thought was quite interesting. The question is, why have my clients and many investors in general soured on ESG styled investing? It's gone to the point where many clients I speak with now view ESG as a marketing ploy by asset management firms to attract more assets. I think the shift in preferences is for four main reasons: control, confusion, being unnecessary, and greenwashing. And I'll touch on each of these points. Um, the first, and I believe the primary reason I've seen folks sour on these strategies is the desire for more control. It's not that many investors are anti ESG, they just believe, and correctly so, that no one can implement a strategy to align their personal goals and values better than themselves. The main reason is for this is ESG style funds are mass marketed products. Not everyone has the exact same preferences, and clients have expressed to me that buying into an ESG strategy is built for the masses, which may not be customized enough for their specific preferences. In a way, this may be somewhat similar to the issue folks have with target date funds. For many 401k investors, a target date fund may be a satisfactory option. However, target date funds are built to cater to the masses. If an investor leaves their employer, oftentimes they'll roll over their 401k money to an IRA where they can customize their strategy to more accurately reflect their needs within their IRA accounts, which they could not do within a 401k using a target date fund. And I think this desire for more control applies to impact investing as well. Many clients are not interested in this lack of customization through traditional ESG and similar products. The next reason for investors and why they have soured on these products is that some clients have found the ESG methodology confusing. I often get the question, why are environmental, social, and governance criteria grouped together when they're pretty distinct measures? There's also some confusion on methodology of selecting securities for ESG funds. I've also been asked, why are certain securities selected for a portfolio where others are excluded? One example off the top of my head was a client making an argument that Amazon is not a true ESG stock. While Amazon rates highly in corporate governance, believe it has an average carbon footprint and scores poorly on labor management. Another factor is for some clients is that they believe that ESG is unnecessary in today's world, which I thought was quite interesting. The rationale is that for a company to be successful in the United States in today's business climate, there are certain things that they need to do which were not required years ago. This includes respecting our environment, treating your workforce and various stakeholders well, and having proper governance. The thought here is that you can use a traditional broad market weighted index fund, and the companies that will be the most successful over time are those that upheld ESG principles. So, some investors have argued that special screenings are actually unnecessary because the best companies naturally rise to the top, as we see expressed in traditional market weighted index funds, and there's certainly some merit to this argument. And the final concern I've seen over what's called greenwashing. And greenwashing is where ESG values are discussed or highlighted primarily to sell a product or strategy and are not actually upheld. In effect, it is the practice of misleading consumers into believing that an investment product is more environmentally friendly than it actually is. It often involves deceptive marketing tactics such as vague sustainability claims or exaggerated environmental benefits. You see this very often in the mutual fund industry, where the name of the fund indicates either ESG or sustainability friendly or some other values based approach. However, in reality, if you look under the hood, you see the strategy does not actually reflect these values. They're just a ploy by an asset management firm to raise more money by capitalizing on the latest investing trends. Again, I want to reiterate that these four items are all observations from discussions with my clients. I didn't conduct a large survey of investors, so this is something I personally noticed from my own interactions. Okay, so given this trend of investors becoming more disillusioned with traditional impact investing products, I've actually been introducing these clients to what I refer to as a values based approach to investing. This more personal strategy allows investors to avoid traditional ESG and similar funds and instead curate portfolios using their own methodology for allocating funds that accurately reflects their own worldviews and personal creeds. Thankfully, with the market's ever expanding menu of investment products and a focus on holistic wealth planning, this type of values based customization is far more seamless to implement today than ever before. Over the past year, I've helped individual investors to express their values through their portfolios in several ways, and I'll share a few examples to consider for yourself and for your clients. First, excluding exposure to countries that have a history of poor human rights. This involves foregoing broad international market exposure and instead selecting specific ETFs that invest only in countries or regions that reflects an investor's values. This may involve purchasing an international fund that excludes a country like China, which is known for its human rights abuses. This may also exclude countries like Egypt, Venezuela, South Africa, and more. Not every one of these countries is heavily represented in the typical investor's portfolio. However, for folks who are passionate about this issue, there are ways of minimizing or eliminating this exposure even further. For a more hands on approach, the investor can purchase a collection of various country specific ETFs with portfolio weightings that express their philosophy. Next is investing in regions of the world that promote democracy and Western values. Other investors I work with have specifically wanted to support Israel because it's the only democracy in the Middle East and promotes equal rights for women and members of the LGBTQ community. For those who don't know the region, Israel is surrounded by countries who would murder someone for being gay if given the opportunity. This bastion of democracy in a very dangerous part of the world is understandably why many investors have expressed interest in investing in Israel, their companies, and also try to buy their products. And I've helped clients do this by investing in Israel based stocks, Israel based ETFs, or individual Israeli bonds. Another area that comes to mind is for folks who are adhering to certain religious values. Sometimes a values based approach is shaped by one's religious beliefs. For example, when working with Muslim clients, I've complied with the religious parameters by avoiding haram or forbidden goods and services involved in the business of alcohol, tobacco, pornography, and pork products. Additionally, Muslim rules concerning interest or riba may require the investor to exclude companies with too much debt as a percentage of their assets. Excessive interest on this debt is also considered to be haram. This restricts investing in conventional banking and insurance sectors unless the company earns 5% or less of interest and the dividend income derived from that interest is donated to charity. Following this framework may require buying individual securities. However, similar to the ESG philosophy, there are funds that will implement this framework for you. These funds aren't as well advertised as their ESG counterparts, but are worth considering. There are also several ETFs that claim to be Sharia compliant. And as I mentioned before, and will highlight again, it's imperative to review the holdings before investing to ensure that they meet your client's standards. These fund companies may knowingly or unknowingly insert companies that don't comply with your specific value system. That's why it's important to double check before investing. Another area is preserving multi generational family values. I sometimes work with several generations of one family where we draft a family investment policy statement or IPS that reflects certain principles they wish to continue passing down to future generations. Earlier in my career, many Holocaust survivors told me explicitly not to invest their money in certain companies that collaborated with the Nazis during World War II. Many of these companies are still publicly traded decades after the Holocaust. Their survivors' children and grandchildren wish to continue adhering to the same investment parameters today. Following the guidelines of the family IPS requires an annual audit of these holdings to ensure that there is no exposure to the specified publicly traded securities. Another example is on philanthropic planning. So this may be particularly interesting to the wealth advisors on this call as the wealth management industry continues to evolve and provide more holistic advice beyond just buying and selling stocks. Sitting down with a client to draft a multi-generational investment policy statement that outlines a family's values which they want to pass down to future generations can be a crucial part of the financial strategy. And I found this type of planning comes up often with philanthropic pursuits. A family may experience a particular event that makes them want to align their money to support a particular cause. For example, if grandma had Alzheimer's, part of the family's investment policy statement may be to support organizations that do work in this area. This is actually a very direct way to align a client's dollars with their values, having a direct impact on certain organizations in this area and transmitting these values to the next generation of the family. Philanthropic planning is a creative way to express family values with one's money that can't be executed by purchasing a mass marketed ESG or SRI mutual fund. A final example of how my clients have taken a more active approach with impact investing in the past couple of years is by voicing disapproval through stock ownership. So, the default approach for many investors is to exclude companies with business practices with which they disagree. However, there are people who believe that the best way to affect change is by having a voice in those companies through ownership. Buying shares of these stocks allows an investor to vote on various matters like the board of directors and attend shareholder meetings. If the shares are owned through a mutual fund, which one's voting rights are delegated to the fund managers, an investor can still call the fund's investors relations department to express his or her views on the position they want the fund to take. Ultimately, for me, the goal with impact, sustainable, ESG, and values based investing, or however you'd like to refer to it, is to increase the likelihood that an investor will stick with their investment strategy because they're investing according to their beliefs. Staying the course during market gyrations and letting compounding work its magic is the ultimate way to build wealth and achieve a client's financial objectives. And if ESG investing or a values based approach does nothing else but encourage investors to stick with their portfolio over the long run and through the down markets, then I believe it is a very worthwhile strategy. Okay, now we're going to take a look at a practical example of how I perform due diligence on a values-based investment product to determine if I want to allocate my clients or my own capital to a particular strategy. And a few months ago, Barron's actually asked me to do just that by writing an article evaluating a new ETF that came to market with the ticker TOV, which spells Tov in Hebrew, meaning good. Utilizing this type of fund, just as an illustration, is a better example than a typical ESG fund, given the various issues I mentioned with ESG funds earlier, including greenwashing, and because investors seem to be moving more towards boutique strategies that reflect their specific values. The first place to start when reviewing a fund is simply to look at the description and determine if its stated goal is in line with your values. The mission of the TOV ETF, which can be found on its fact sheet or prospectus, mentions that given the rise in anti Semitism, the increase in anti Semitic incidents, and the unjustified demonization of Israel around the world, a financial product that aims to fight these injustices through shareholder advocacy may resonate with many US based investors, especially those who are Jewish. According to the fund's fact sheet, Tov's strategy aims to deliver performance comparable to index funds that track the 500 largest US publicly traded companies while screening out companies with business activities that don't align with Jewish values. It will then score the remaining stocks based on Jewish values. Finally, the fund will engage with corporate leadership to combat anti Semitism, support Israel, and promote the Jewish value of tikkun olam, which loosely translates to bettering the world. I also find it noteworthy that this ETF is a joint project of the Anti Defamation League and Jewish investors group J-Lens, who work together to empower investors to combat anti Semitism, support Israel, and embody Jewish values. The mission may or may not speak to you. The point here is that you determine that whatever product you're evaluating makes sense for your purposes. Next, it's worth taking a look at the level of assets. And last time I checked, this fund had just shy of $130 million, which is small but not insignificant. If a fund only has tens of millions of dollars in it, there's a reasonable possibility that the fund will be closed down and liquidated or merged into another fund that may not align with your values. So keep the level of assets in mind. Next are fees, which are imperative to review. Many niche products will gouge clients on fees. However, I was pleasantly surprised to see the expense ratio on this fund was listed at 0.18%, which is quite reasonable. By way of comparison, one of the largest ESG ETFs, the Vanguard ESG US Stock ETF, has an expense ratio of 0.09%. But this is one of the largest ESG funds in the world and also not as niche of a product. On the other hand, the Clean Energy ETF, the iShares Global Clean Energy ETF, has an expense ratio of 0.41%. The fee structure also looks attractive relative to other faith-based ETFs. For example, the FIS Christian Stock Fund has an expense ratio of 0.69%, while the Wahid FTSE USA Sharia ETF has an expense ratio of 0.50%. It's important to compare the product you're evaluating to similar products for a sense of perspective. Another thing I reviewed was the holdings. Tov's largest holdings, they look similar to the S&P 500, albeit with slightly different weightings. This portfolio composition seems to indicate that the ETF isn't purchasing unusual or overly speculative stocks, which offers a level of comfort. On the other hand, it may cause some investors to wonder why they wouldn't just own an S&P 500 ETF, which give it far more liquidity at a fraction of the price. This brings us to the next criteria, and this is critical, which is the management's ability to affect change, which is the key point here. The essential question for investors who are looking to align their values with their money is whether the portfolio management team, and in this case, the folks they work with at the ADL, will be able to influence large U.S. companies with the ETF's stated goal of fighting anti-Semitism and supporting Israel. The fund size is currently quite small compared with other institutional players, but ADL has a powerful voice and laser-focused mission of fighting hate and those who aim to boycott Israel. My hope is that the ETF can drive change among those companies who currently have conflicting values. Only time will tell if they're actually successful on this goal. Next is a big picture item, which is overall implementation. For financial advisors who find this product that they're evaluating suitable for their clients, I would suggest paying close attention to the overall weighting within their portfolio. Allocating more than 5% of one's portfolio to any niche product may be imprudent. Investors can carve out the money for the Tove portion of their portfolio from their large capitalization U.S. equity sleeve, given Tove's overlap with the traditional S&P 500 fund. Naturally, depending on the product you're evaluating, the portfolio construction may look different. The bottom line here is this. Overall, I would view this ETF through the same lens as most ESG products. Namely, if it helps increase the likelihood that investors will stick with their strategy because they wholeheartedly believe in the fund's mission, then it's a big win in my book. I know I sound like a broken record on this point, but this is one of the main takeaways of this webinar. After all, staying the course during market gyrations and letting compounding work its magic is the ultimate way to build wealth and achieve a client's financial objectives. Now for my decision regarding this fund. So, as a Jew and a proud Zionist, I was interested to learn about this ETF, but at the end of the day, I prefer to take a more hands-on approach and a multi-pronged approach to aligning my money with my values. Remember, wealth planning encompasses more than just investing. To have the biggest impact, it's essential to align your time, money, and efforts with your values. I believe this is the best way to make a lasting difference. In my case, my values of supporting Israel and combating anti Semitism are implemented by donating money to causes based in Israel that fight anti-Semitism. I also spend my discretionary funds to travel to Israel and purchase Israeli manufactured products. I also vote for politicians that are passionate and look to protect these same ideals. In terms of investments, many of the most innovative companies that have major hubs in Israel, this includes Google, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, IBM, Intel, and Cisco, to name just a few, but all the most innovative firms in the world have business people, scientists, and technologists based in offices in Israel. Therefore, investing in a market weighted index fund, both domestic and international, gets me exposure to these companies who support Israel's economy. In the past, I have owned Israel bonds and individual stocks of companies based in Israel, and in the future, I may purchase an Israel ETF which tracks the country's economy, as I believe this is the most seamless and prudent way to gain even more exposure to this market. However, right now, this is the process that works best for me. It may and likely will change in the future, but this is where I stand today. On the other hand, I have clients who share the same values, yet they wanted me to purchase individual Israeli based securities or ETFs that track the market, or the TOV ETF, which I just discussed. As the saying goes, different strokes for different folks. There's no one way, right way to express your values with your money. We can debate the merits of a product like this, and I am certainly not advocating on this call to purchase it for themselves or for their clients. I'm not in the business of promoting any specific product or funds. I'm just attempting to illustrate a framework for implementing impact investing that the traditional ESG or SRI models don't offer, and many wealthy investors will ultimately outgrow. Hopefully, this framework will help you assess which products are appropriate for yourself and for your clients. Next, let's discuss a bit about the future of impact investing, if we can. Despite my skepticism on the number of products in the space, I'm excited about the future of the type of investing in whatever form it takes. One reason is that now more than ever, investors are in more control of how they implement their portfolio to align with their values. As I say often in my webinars and in my articles, the investment landscape has become democratized where everyone can have access to the best investment products on the market today. This is especially true with impact investing, where there are now countless ETFs, mutual funds, and separately managed accounts, all that may be able to align with investors' values, whatever they may be, and I expect the options to increase over time. Furthermore, if you decide that you don't want any of the prepackaged products, there's now more information and research that is readily accessible to the masses to help investors customize their own portfolios. As I mentioned, it's important to look under the hood of these products and strategies to ensure that they truly align with your goals and are not just marketing ploys. Using the case study I went through as a framework may be a helpful starting point as you develop your own strategy. Finally, as the financial advisory industry continues to move towards providing holistic advice and not just product sales, advisors are now better equipped than ever to work hand in hand with their clients to align all aspects of their financial plan with their values. As I already touched on, this includes how you spend your money, where you give to charity, and the experiences you choose to share with your loved ones to go along with selecting investments that reflect your ideals. And one final takeaway that I want to leave you with today, which is this. Remember, what you spend money on is what you truly value in life. We are all guilty to some extent of talking about things we care about but behaving in a contrary way. For example, one may say they are into health food, but if they spend their money to have junk food in the house and snack all day, then do they really value a life of healthy living? That's a fairly innocuous example, but let's take it a step further. If you're passionate about workers' rights, perhaps investing in China is not the best approach. If you value women's rights and LGBTQ rights, but still have investments in countries in the Middle East other than Israel, then perhaps you don't really value those ideals or are just not implementing your investments effectively. If you value the concepts of sustainable living and the environment, then embracing investing in those companies is important, but it's equally important to spend your own money in a more intentional way that doesn't violate these ideals, like the manufacturing of products that are harmful to the environment. I would encourage attendees to look at their own lives and evaluate their expenses as well as their portfolio to determine where they spend and invest their money. Understanding where our money goes can be very revealing. It will help direct us on what we need to do to be more impactful with our dollars in order to reflect the values that we want to live by and those that we want to pass down to the next generation. Okay, that's it for this week's program. That concludes today's session. Hopefully, you were able to take away a nugget or two to apply to your own life or practice. And should you have any follow up questions, you can reach me at jonathan@parkbridgewealth.com. Email is generally the best way to get a hold of me. Feel free to reach out if I could be a resource in any way. And by the way, for the business owners of this call, I also provide complimentary 401k reviews for folks who may be interested. Three more quick items before I let you go today. First, this concludes my spring webinar series, but have no fear, the invitation to my fall webinars will be sent out in the coming weeks. Yes, I'm taking the summer off, but it seems like most people disappear for the months of July and August anyway. In the meantime, I'd love to continue to grow this webinar community, so if you have a friend, colleague, or client who'd like to be notified of my upcoming webinars, they can email me with the word webinar in the subject line. I'll add them to my webinar distribution list. Second, you can follow all my work on X and Instagram at Jonathan Money, and by connecting with me on LinkedIn, you could also listen to my weekly podcast called Jonathan Money, which is available on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I do not take any time off from my podcast, so if you would like your regular fill of Jonathan Shenkman content, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss anything. And you can also watch my practical planning tip videos, which I post several times a week, by following me on YouTube at Jonathan Money as well. And third, please take 30 seconds to fill out my survey at the end of this program. It helps me improve my webinars and provide timely and interesting content to attendees. I thank you in advance for that. And with that, this concludes today's session. Please stay safe and healthy and have a wonderful day, everybody.